Hi, I'm Michael, and this is California. And with the pandemic slowing down, there is a potentiality of a second wave coming back in the fall in the middle of our election season. And this brings up so many questions about how are we going to be able to vote, and what does an election look like in November if there is a pandemic? And really, who benefits from having a pandemic during an election? And can this change the way that we as Americans vote forever? So today we're going to talk about what could be some of the potential outcomes of having a pandemic during an election season, as well as who may actually benefit from it. Now, before we do that, if you like this information, if you find it interesting, if you find it useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when our newest and most informative videos become available. Obviously, one of the biggest concerns about this voting season is going to be regarding health and safety, because essentially having large amounts of people congregating in one single place is basically the definition of voting. But having all these people in one single space at places that people traditionally poll at, so like schools or community centers or gyms, could essentially turn those polling locations into hotbeds of the pandemic. And that means that the voting process could really be changed by the measures that are taken to protect the voters themselves. So for example, it could really tamp down the fervor that's typically around campaigns during the campaign season. It may tamp down campaign rallies, making them much smaller, or even Democratic or Republican conventions will perhaps be much smaller. And the number of polling places could even be less or fewer and farther apart, which means that it's going to take even longer for folks to be able to vote, let alone that folks are going to have to clean them every time someone comes in and out of the booth, as well as those sweet old senior volunteers who are quite literally risking their lives for our right to vote. So all these measures centered around limiting groups of people accumulating in one single space to ensure that polling locations are safe and healthy are definitely going to have an effect on voter turnout as well as the election overall. So let's think about what are some of the changes that may come about as a result of the pandemic during this voting season. And really, one of the biggest ones is a more intense focus on distance voting. So maybe voting by mail, or even some have mentioned voting online, or perhaps maybe delaying the election or extending the time folks that people have to be able to vote. Also, if there's a second wave of the pandemic lockdown, that'll definitely have the effect on people's ability to get out to the polls, or may actually increase it as well. Longer wait lines and fewer polling places, and well as people having to do with reduced public transportation services like buses, trains, and trolleys, could mean another additional effect on the ability for some folks to be able to get to the polls, especially if those polls are fewer and farther apart. Now, realistically, there are a variety and innumerable ways that the pandemic and a lockdown could affect an election, and each of these variations will definitely affect voters. So the biggest question is, who could really benefit from the pandemic and a lockdown during the election season? And these things are really hard to predict, because changes in voting processes or even environment around voting means a benefit or a challenge to those folks who are actually trying to run for the election. But when we look at voting by mail, which would allow folks to be able to vote from home, it is something that people can already do, but it has been much less popular than the in-person method. But traditionally, it would be believed that voting by mail would help out Democrats, because Democrats tend to always benefit from greater voter turnout. And the logic goes that if the process of voting is easier, it means that it will just expand existing voting turnouts, meaning more Democratic votes. Now, typically, Democrats have more populous states and more crowded cities, but in addition to that, voting by mail would make it easier for communities of colors who traditionally have a hard time getting to the polls to get their votes in. Republicans have always tried to do anything they can do to stop making voting easy, including stopping voting by mail, claiming that it's subject to fraud and is problematic, even though this has not been true in any statistically significant way. Of course, voting by mail has some significant barriers, especially to those folks who do not speak English or are unable to read overall. And also ensuring that the ballot is filled out correctly, or if they actually get sent back in time, or can they even be tampered with, or even get lost in the mail. So those are all important questions and problems that come up with voting by mail. It's definitely not a perfect system. Another variable that we should definitely look at is whether there's a second wave of the pandemic or a lockdown. And it can really be good for both Democrats and Republicans. It can be good for Democrats because it puts them in a stronger position to negotiate for more social benefits that they normally advocate. So things like more stimulus check, expanded benefits that are justified under a pandemic lockdown, as well as increased unemployment or potentially bring out a temporary universal income like we kind of sort of had previously had for a couple months. All this is made stronger by the return of a second wave of a pandemic or a lockdown. Now, it could also benefit Republicans in the sense that if there is a lockdown and a pandemic, it may bring down the overall voter turnout, which obviously benefits Republicans, with folks who are being more concerned about their health and safety or even having less accessible voting locations. Republicans tend to be more able to get in and to get their votes in person and more willing to defy things like lockdowns or not so concerned about safety measures in order to get their vote in. Now, finally, the status quo tends to benefit Republicans. Biden has been silent for the last valuable few months because of the lockdown and has not been able to campaign in the same way that Trump has. Trump also being president is a big advantage to him. The incumbency is always a huge advantage, so they have those things going for them as well. So overall, there's still a long way to go before the elections happen, and hopefully there is not a resurgence of the pandemic or the lockdown. But if there is, it'll definitely make the election season considerably more interesting, turning the advantages and disadvantages of all the folks running for their elections at all levels on their head and potentially changing the way that Americans vote in perpetuity. So we'll just have to see what that actually looks like, and if it's not, then we'll be back to business as usual. But if there is that pandemic, it'll definitely make a much more interesting year. Thank you so much for watching our video, and I hope that you found it interesting or useful or helpful. And if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you have any comments or questions, leave your comments and questions down below. We'd love to see your comments and questions. We'll be happy to make a new video or a new post as soon as we can. Now, additionally, we here at California, we know health insurance. So whether it's Covered California or Medicare or Medi-Cal or Medicaid, or even health insurance for a small group, we know health insurance. And I know it can be very confusing sometimes coming from your work insurance and going to private insurance, or if you're turning 65 and you're looking for your Medicare options. We can help you look at what your Medicare options are and help you look at the plans that best fit your needs as well as your budget. Now, other than that, I am Michael, and this is California, wishing you a happy, healthy day.